Welcome back to the Student Have Live Faculty of Business and Law event, Navigating the New Normal. Well, now we're going to talk about innovating for success. We've already touched on a lot of these topics. Our chat room is heating up, and it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces in the chat, sharing ideas and OU student meetups and advice and how meditation has helped you and some of the tips around well-being. So do keep talking. This is a great space to be able to share ideas, meet other people, and hopefully make some new friends along the way. Now, we have obviously George and Katerina in the chat answering any questions you have. So if you are wanting to know anything from our student support team colleagues, do ask. And of course, Emily is relaying your comments to our guests in the studio, who in this session are Jason Phillips and Christine Mira. Jason is an associate lecturer and also a consultant teaching in business, marketing and economics with the Open University, and is currently utilising a lifelong interest as in beer as an investor and consultant in microbreweries. So that's really good to know, Jason. I'm sure you'll have some interesting insights from both of those areas. Christine is a business academic in the OU Business School, but before that, she's worked in a whole range of different places, such as Grant Thornton Accountants, Oxfam, and also local government, and doing some strategic marketing consultancy. So heaps of experience and advice to share there also for Christine. So our first question really, which is something we've touched on a little bit earlier today in the programme, is about the notion that so many businesses have had to change as a result of the pandemic. So Christine, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what your experience has been.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Karen. I mean, like many of my colleagues, I changed jobs. But before changing jobs, I was in one of those brick universities on a campus. And we had literally a matter of maybe about 10 days to transform lectures, tutorials into some form of digital content before our next term started. So you can imagine very, very busy, but also at the same time, lots of other forms of innovation where we were thinking about how we would not just deliver content, but how we would reach out to students. I was at a very small private university, and therefore we were very majorly invested in pastoral care. A large number of international students, some of whom were unable to get home because if our borders were open, maybe their home borders weren't. So there was lots of issues and difficulties, but then lots of innovation going on as to how we're going to put people in touch with one another, how are we going to facilitate student interactions with one another. So innovations around peer communications, innovations around our communications, moving into forums, lots of the things that actually have been happening at the OU for a long time, but for a traditional university were completely brand new. I had colleagues who had never taught on any sort of online platform ever before and were completely flummoxed by the concepts of breakout rooms and whiteboards online. And they were looking around for a pen to use the whiteboard online. It was that level of sheer kind of like almost fear, but also certainly how are we going to do this. And so as an organization, you do have to change and you do have to modernize. Innovation, therefore, can be actually really quite radical. It can be quite a massive transformation. We know, obviously, that many manufacturing businesses completely changed what they do. They found that they couldn't open in their previous ways. They couldn't manufacture maybe the products they had done previously, and they moved into where they saw opportunities. Those that wanted to succeed and were able to, if they had that agility, they innovated. They moved into PPE production or other services, if they're in a service industry that would actually have a market in this new world. And of course, so many people didn't know when we first locked down how long it would take. There was a lot of thinking, oh, it's only for a couple of weeks, we just need to get by. So they maybe didn't want to make the wholesale changes that actually after a while became quite apparent that they were really necessary. So yeah, that's my experience, was definitely in the HE sector. Change has been really quite radical and quite different. For me personally, I also changed jobs after a few months, so that's been interesting too. Coming to the OU has been a really interesting experience, and again, I have never met any of my colleagues face to face, and have no idea when that opportunity will arise. So again, it's a very different way of working. Lots of examples there of innovations really, and us looking at working practices even at the OU where people are no longer office based.
Mm. And I think you were talking about dynamic innovation, and PPE is a really good example of that. I mean, in so many different ways. I've had, friends of mine who've worked at companies where they used to have, women's wear, men's wear, and now it's masks as a completely different accounting line, a different line of manufacturing, and that's impacted on their whole business operation. So from things like that to various things at the Open University. I mean, when, the pandemic first hit, I know one of the colleagues in STEM went and actually made some sanitizer for the local hospital because they couldn't get hold of any with
Yeah,
some of the chemicals that we had in our lab. And recently, I think the OU's been a vaccination centre. So even our organisation has
yeah.
shifted, hasn't it?
Yes, yes. The building where I would have joined had we not been in the middle of the pandemic and working from home is now a vaccination centre. So I think that's a really interesting innovation in terms of use of assets, using your buildings in completely different ways. So yes, innovations of markets. Yeah, there's a nice picture there coming up shortly of the Michael Young building, which would have been, offices, rows of desks in the old world, but is now a completely different usage, or currently is completely different usage, and so that's really important, I think, to think about, as a business, how can we use what we have? It's not
Yeah.
necessarily about always where are the opportunities. It is sometimes, but also what assets do we have? What strengths do we have? If you do your SWOT analysis, where are our strengths? Where are maybe weaknesses? How do we apply strengths to opportunities? So there's lots of, business thinking and business models that are really important here. We also talk about things like pestle, don't we? But in terms of innovation, how do we innovate to make the most of those opportunities? Some radical innovations, some it might just be incremental innovations, slight
And
tweaks.
some have been like people really struggling to survive. I know. I mean, you're very passionate about small businesses, and I know for many people, they've had to really shift things in quite challenging times. I mean, it can be well and good to diversify and expand on a product range, for example. That can sound really sensible, but I think for some of us, this pandemic has really, shifted massively. And we were talking about well-being earlier in terms of, what we're capable of, how we can survive, and how we can continue to, keep ourselves both occupied, happy, our business is growing in really challenging, shifting circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many small businesses that are family businesses, so everything is entwined. It isn't a case of just waiting for pandemic restrictions to be lifted. There isn't maybe that opportunity. You do actually have to make the innovations and the changes in order for your lifestyle to continue. It is so integral to how you live your life because you're so used to your business being such a key part of your life, and life and work are very much entwined. We're talking about this as a big change for so many people who have started working from home and having to study from home and having to live at home and have other family members at home. But for some people, they've kind of worked like that a long time. They just now have to find different ways of actually making it relevant,
Yeah,
making it
yeah.
actually work. So yeah, incredible, really, what people have done. Um,
Yeah. Well, Meshra says our family have tried to get a website running. And Angela speaks about something shifting, which I love. It says, I hope to keep some of the innovations. Our local cafe didn't have a garden before the pandemic, and now it looks amazing, lit by fairy lights at night. Sometimes we were talking about
yeah,
time and space before, and our notions of what's valuable have changed. But now just to be able to get together in somewhere, pretty and safe and do something like eat or drink, are pleasures that perhaps we'd really underestimated beforehand. Jason, I wonder if you might share some of your experiences, in terms of organisations. How's it all been from your side?
To kind of echo a lot of what Christine says, I mean, I work predominantly for the AU now, so we've had to very quickly, change the way we deliver things and provide, mostly online delivery. So that's been very interesting, and I think the student feedback we've had, I mean, I think they found it very valuable, particularly during lockdown, to have this kind of outlet and to be able to study, to be able to interact with other students, talk about their experience, and of course, apply a lot of the theory that we've been looking at. So that's been a fantastic element of it. And I suppose in terms of things, I mean, with well, certainly in the brewing trade, it's a key issue in that pubs were closed for a big chunk of last year, so that is obviously a key part of the supply chain. And so obviously that was something that a lot of those kind of businesses had to deal with and come up with strategies for very quickly. So a lot of them again moved into kind of more kind of mail order, online ordering, selling their products, their beers and other drinks through that channel. And I think a lot of them have been pretty successful. I suppose people in lockdown, it didn't take away their desire to have a drink. And as they couldn't go to the pub, then obviously they could get some very interesting drinks delivered to their homes. So I think in a lot of cases, it's been pretty successful. And again, I suspect after the lockdown, whenever that is, I think a lot of these companies will maintain that to quite a significant degree. I suppose the issue then they're going to have is being able to kind of scale up and produce drink again for bars and pubs when they sort of properly reopen, hopefully as soon as possible. So that's been a really interesting aspect. And I think there's been a lot of push towards kind of low alcohol, low calorie options, possibly because in lockdown people getting less exercise. Less exercise plus alcoholic drinks can often produce, as we know, extra weight. So I think there's been a real big kind of move towards that, and making I suppose nice, palatable kind of non-alcohol drinks, which hasn't always been the case. That's kind of been the holy grail for quite a while now for a lot of these kinds of companies. So it's very interesting in terms of some of those changes and in terms of how I suppose demand's changed due to the pandemic in terms of how customers consume their products, their drinks.
Emily, I wonder if we can come to you. We've asked people at home about innovation in their workplaces. 88% say that they have seen innovation in their workplace. But when we asked about what kind of innovation they've seen, most people, 60%, say it's been incremental rather than radical. So there have been some shifts. And Jeanette has a lovely story here, Emily. I wonder if you could share with us about how her workplace shifted really fundamentally in terms of offering something meaningful for people.
I was just looking. So quite a few people have been talking about the fact they're working remotely now. Some people have tried to set up their own businesses working remotely. But so Jeanette was saying that organisations have become better at sharing and celebrating successes, and also finding that they've done that through finding new ways of working. So I think previously maybe we sort of had a way of working, and actually introducing rapid change can be a tricky thing, and takes negotiation. It costs money and you have to prove its worth. But then COVID has forced people, as Jeanette is saying, pre-COVID they wouldn't have considered these changes, whereas COVID has forced them almost, and actually businesses can see the benefits to it. So people that previously wouldn't have been able to work from home, saving everyone money, saving businesses money. But yeah, so there's lots of different benefits to. I mean, obviously we're all in a really difficult time, and it can't be underestimated the impact this has on everyone and the nation, the globe. But it's really interesting to see what the world's going to look like going forward. So yeah, really interesting point, Jeanette.
And I think what I liked about the story is that, because people couldn't work, Jeanette was in a government organisation, so because people couldn't do the job that, they were perhaps assigned to do, they really shifted their focus and they set up a community hub to help people who were shielding and lonely, and really reaching out to that community. And I think, recognising how important it is to look after people's well-being is just so valuable. And she says it made such a difference, not only to that community, but also to the staff involved. involved. And I think this is one thing that I've certainly noticed at these Student Hub Live events, is that by often sharing and supporting each other, we feel better about ourselves, and we make more friends, we feel a lot happier as well. So there is something really nice about giving and supporting in those spaces that can also have a benefit on our own well-being. Tracy makes a really interesting point also, which I found, Tracy, is just by shifting routine. So Tracy was commuting beforehand and walking the dog after her commute, and now what she's noticed is that people are so much more friendly out during the day, because she's taking that lovely lunch break that we all aspire to and sometimes get, where we can take the dogs out at lunchtime and have a nice walk and meet people, and people do seem a lot more friendly. I think, again, perhaps because we're taking the time to maybe notice things around us and maybe appreciating our locality, and not maybe feeling just like an anonymous person in a massive space. So yeah, interesting, Emily, isn't it?
Yeah, really, it's really interesting. It's I think I'd agree with all of that. And yeah, just the work that Jeanette has done. I think everyone can relate. I've seen that in quite a lot of places. So lots of communities I know and friends have said the same thing. People passing around, sort of coming around the community and just making sure everyone's okay. It's really kind of heartening the way people come together. And again, this is one reason why I think the OU Hub's great, and encourage students to attend things, because it just reminds you, we're all human, we're all in it together, and we can provide a bit of support and just remind each other, things can be stressful, but we've got this.
Absolutely. So we've seen that there have been lots of shifts, and we've also looked at the ways in which some of those shifts could be temporary and some of them could be, a lot sort of further ingrained in our everyday life. Jason, I wonder if we could talk about this topic about teaching innovation. We've talked about ways in which people have innovated, but Christine was mentioning beforehand some of the sort of ways in which the OU will teach around innovation. So Jason, what do you think? Can we actually teach innovation?
Well, I suppose that's the key debate, isn't it? I suppose it's the nature-nurture debate in terms of, innovators, entrepreneurs, etc. So, yeah, I mean, some would argue that you're kind of born to be an innovator. You have certain traits that are kind of inbuilt, and that, they're to some extent, programmed into you, part of your DNA. And obviously, other schools would suggest that, well, they could be taught, they could be developed. It's all very well having the raw materials, but, experience, business experience, and obviously learning, doing business qualifications can also develop that or give you new perspectives on those and how to utilize them. So obviously it's a central debate, so they would argue that, innovators have, traits such as creativity, determination, intense focus, that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously, a lot of the modules from level 2 cover this to a great degree. And I suppose, it's a core debate really. So it's an interesting one for students to look at and tackle.
Everyone at home thinks that we can teach innovation, with 87% saying yes. Christine, I wonder what your thoughts are on this.
Yes, I mean, I'd echo what Jason has said already, in so far as, and obviously what our students are saying, insofar as there might be some people who are, very creative, they have innovative skills, but actually the learning how to assess the environment, the learning how to consider all the implications of what is happening and how to then think about how to respond to them. Those can be taught. Those certainly are business skills that we do teach at every level, aren't they? And, the same as entrepreneurial skills for small businesses. We might say that some people are great at coming up with an enterprise idea, but actually that seeing it through, making it happen, ensuring that it's successful, there's lots of evidence that actually you can teach the right ways of doing things, or the frameworks in order to consider all aspects, because there's never a right or a wrong way, but having a much clearer way of assessing and understanding the data that you have obviously gives you a much stronger position for any sort of decision making, whether it's, to start a business, what markets to pursue, whether to change, how to change, so it does all link in very strongly with innovation there. And I think for many businesses, they did think that they only maybe had to make some temporary changes, as we discussed. But we've seen, haven't we, over the past year, as so many of our students have been saying, that actually lots of things have changed forever, it seems. We have already changed in the way that sometimes we relate to one another, and that, maybe we are taking more time to connect with people, to talk to people. And so that will filter into how people do business, because business is led by people. So if we're changing socially, that will change how we operate in our businesses and in the business world too. So I think there's lots to consider here, and I think it's a really interesting time, actually, business wise. I mean, obviously there's been so many awful aspects, but in terms of business, there's lots to understand and to consider and to develop further.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that really interesting discussion, Christine and Jason. And so as Christine was sort of saying, the social innovation is something new, and the modules at the Open University are constantly being updated, revised and increased. So if you are thinking about modules, I know some of you are thinking about which module to look at next, and you are interested in innovation, there are some particular modules at level 2 and 3. There's in business B205, introducing innovation and entrepreneurship, and B327, which is creating futures sustainable enterprise and innovation. So check those out. Speak to your student support team about some of those options if you are thinking about choosing your next module. We're now going to have a short video break, which is about high intensity study with Robert Craw, and then I'll be back very soon for some more discussions. Stay with us.